It's already been a rough season for the New Jersey Devils, and Jack Hughes getting season-ending shoulder surgery is just the cherry on top. Where does the team go from here? And more importantly, where does Jack go from here? Because I feel as though he has a lot of untapped potential to showcase to the league, but injuries have always derailed them. We have a lot to break down in today's episode of Locked On Devils. Buckle up, everybody.
You're Locked On Devils, your daily podcast on the New Jersey Devils. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi, this is Bryce Salvador, and you're Locked On Devils with Trey Matthews.
Scores! Oh, Stevens stepped up, nailed it. Brodor's got the puck. What a shot. The Devils win the Stanley Cup.
Alrighty now, what is up, New Jersey? Welcome back to the Locked On Devils podcast here on Locked On Network. I'm your host, college hockey play-by-play announcer, Devils writer for Pucks and Pitchforks, and also part-time credential media member, Trey Matthews. As promised, we're going to talk about the injury circumstance surrounding Jack Hughes because, as you guys know, his season was cut short because he had season-ending shoulder surgery. We're going to talk about what possibly led up to it, my thoughts on the matter. But before we get into all of that, somebody left a comment on my previous video asking my thoughts on the situation happening in Arizona because, as some of you know, I am currently going to school in Arizona, and I am closely associated with the Arizona Coyotes. And with everything that's been going on, I will share my quick thoughts on the matter. Short and simple, it sucks. It absolutely sucks because I think hockey does belong in the desert. When I first got to Arizona, I didn't know what the hockey culture was like, but what I know right now, what I know in the present moment is that I think the city of Phoenix, the city of Tempe, wherever, they are full-blown hockey, whether it's the Coyotes, the Sun Devils, the Roadrunners, the Kachinas, whatever. I love the culture down here, and I think they deserve an NHL team. And it doesn't affect me personally because, as you guys know, I don't cover the Coyotes, but I know a lot of people, some friends and colleagues who do cover the Coyotes or work for the organization. And now there's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of speculation, and it's definitely a confusing time because they're trying to figure out what potentially is next in their development. And if I put myself in their shoes, I wouldn't know what happens to this show if the Devils were to relocate. I don't know what happens to my content that I worked so hard to build. And I feel for my friends. I feel for my colleagues. I feel for anyone that I've interacted with inside Mullet Arena because they are very nice people and they've allowed me to be credentialed for some Coyotes events. Short and simple, it sucks and I wish for the best and I really hope things do get worked out, and I'm definitely keeping some people that I know in my thoughts and heart, and I wish everyone close to the situation the very best. Okay, let's talk about Jack Hughes and his season-ending shoulder surgery. In the first segment, I will read you the PR report, give you my initial thoughts on the matter. Then in the second segment, we're going to do some sleuthing because we're going to figure out when did Jack Hughes sustain this injury, because as we know, he's been sidelined for 2 injuries this season, one in November and one in January. And then in the third and final segment, we're going to talk about the development of Jack Hughes because I think it's safe to say that Jack Hughes is definitely not a bust like people were making him out to be during his first and second year in the league. I think he has panned out really well. I think he is definitely the future for the Devils organization, but he could just not stay healthy. And that's definitely been a damper for the Devils and where he can potentially take his game because I think he's a future MVP caliber player, but we'll talk more about that in the third and final segment. Courtesy of the Devils PR team, here's the medical update on Jack Hughes. They sent this out to all media members on April 9th. In recent conversations with Jack, his family, and representatives, the Devils athlete care staff and Devils chief medical officer, Dr. Jonathan L. Glashow, it was determined that Jack should be held out of game action for the rest of the season and proceed with shoulder surgery. He will undergo the surgery on April 10th, which is already passed, and it will be performed by Dr. Peter Millett in Vail, Colorado. Hughes is expected to make a full recovery to be available for the 2024 Devils training camp. All right. I'm holding my breath for him to be ready for training camp, because according to reports, this is going to take months and months of recovery, and hopefully all goes well for Jack. I'm holding on to the fact that he is young and still able to heal quicker than others. My overall thoughts on this is that it just kind of confirmed everyone's suspicion, which was Jack Hughes seemed to be a little off as the season progressed, especially when he returned in early February, because it seems like the Devils were trying everything they could potentially do to get him back onto the rink, and rightfully so, because the Devils this season, they have been very up and down. They've been very inconsistent, and with Jack Hughes out of the lineup, that is one of your main sources of point production, and you kind of lose your identity in a sense, because the offense is built around Jack Hughes. As we know, Jack Hughes, he likes to play the game fast. He likes to set up his teammates. He likes to be that main facilitator. And when he's out of the lineup, obviously there's a lot of moving parts for an engine, but he is definitely a main component. And it just seemed like the Devils needed some sort of hope, and they were trying everything they could to be cautious, but at the same time, get him back out there ASAP, because there was some speculation that he might be ready to go and participate in the All-Star game in Toronto, but that didn't come into fruition. He actually left All-Star game festivities a little early, so that way he could recover a little quicker and get ready for the second half of the season. But as the season progressed, I think we all noticed that Jack Hughes was somewhat cautious, because he was not playing his primary position of center. He was not taking faceoffs, and it seemed like he did not want to shoot at times. And we'll talk more about that in the second segment. But moving forward, like I said, I'm holding my breath for training camp. I really hope he is fully healed by then. But this is a month-by-month recovery process, and we're going to have to see how everything goes. I'm keeping my fingers crossed for no setbacks, nothing lingering, because Jack Hughes needs to be fully healthy in order for the Devils to compete at a high level. And we'll talk more about that in segment 3. Now, we're going to do some investigating and see what the main culprit was for Jack Hughes' injury woes this season. But before we continue, let me tell you guys about FanDuel. It's playoff time in the NBA and NHL. Baseball's in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. Bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all on an app that is safe, secure, and easy to use. What are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make sure your first bet is an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Okay, like I said in segment 1, I think it's safe to say that when Jack Hughes recovered from his second injury, he seemed to be a little quote-unquote off to his standards. Now, I want to make something perfectly clear. Jack Hughes was still a very good player for the Devils, because his worst is still better than a lot of players' best, and I'm sure a lot of players in the league would kill to have even a fraction of what he's capable of doing. At the conclusion of the season, he appeared in 62 games. He had 27 goals, 47 assists for a grand total of 74 points. That is great point production, like I just said. With Jack Hughes out of the lineup, the Devils are a significantly worse team, because Jack Hughes has to be the star caliber player to make this engine drive for the Devils. And it's definitely going to hurt them. But looking the rest of the way, the Devils are mathematically eliminated from playoff contention. There's only a few games remaining in the regular season. There's no point in having Jack Hughes muscle his way through these next 3 or so games and have the possibility of making his injury even worse, because the Devils have everything to lose and they have nothing to gain in this sort of circumstance. A lot of people are wondering, why wasn't Jack Hughes shut down? And I'll talk about that momentarily, but let's put on our thinking caps. Let's act like we're Sherlock Holmes for a second, because like I said early on in the episode, Jack Hughes has dealt with 2 injuries that have sidelined him for a decent amount of games. The first injury he sustained was against the St. Louis Blues back in November, because as we all remember, he went flying into the boards and it seemed like it was a serious injury. and it was revealed that it was a right shoulder injury, and he had to miss a decent amount of games, not too many, but he was listed week to week. And then come January, towards the end of the Chicago Blackhawks game, Jack Hughes slipped on his own skates and he hurt himself. At first, I didn't think it was anything serious, but then I remember Jack Hughes has already dealt with an arm injury this season, so he might have re-aggravated it. And as a result, he had to miss like over a month of action, and that really hurt the Devils. But when he returned, that's when people started to be a little concerned with the severity of his injury. Was he fully healthy? Was he fully recovered? Because, like I said, it just seemed like Jack Hughes wasn't really the same. And people were suspicious with his overall health to the point where he was asked post-game at one point, was he fully healthy? And he answered quickly and said, yes. Now, the same question was asked to Lindy Ruff when Ruff was still the head coach at the time. Is Jack Hughes fully healthy? And Lindy sort of answered it honestly, but he didn't answer it fully. He just said, like, there's a point of the year where everyone's battling something, whether it's an injury or a sickness. And he said Jack Hughes was no exception to that matter, which led a lot of people to be suspicious, like I just said, including myself. While I was in Vegas, I asked a few people around the Devils organization, is Jack Hughes fully healthy? And the answer that I got from some people was that Jack Hughes will say that he's healthy, but the coaching staff says otherwise. And I think that was quite evident. Now, I was listening to the Devils radio stream recently, and Matt and Chico were also speculating as to when did Jack Hughes get hurt. And they suspected that he got injured in a recent game, because it raises the question, if Jack Hughes was dealing with this severe of an injury and it required surgery, do you think the Devils would be dumb enough to put him on the sheet of ice and risk aggravating that injury even more? That does raise an important question, but you got to remember that back in November, the thing that kept him out initially was that right shoulder injury when he went flying into the boards after he got tangled up with Justin Falk and also Jordan Binnington. Obviously, it wasn't intentional, but freak accident and things happen. And then in that game against the Chicago Blackhawks in early January, it was an arm injury once again. And Elliot Friedman had to give the report saying that Jack Hughes seemed to avoid surgery at that point because it wasn't that severe, but it seemed like as the season progressed, he just got worse, and worse to his standards, obviously, to the point where people are just like, he doesn't look like himself. And this is where I'm conflicted, because I do want to say that I think the initial hit was when he got injured against the Blues, and then the cherry on top was when he got injured in early January. But like I just said, and similar to what Matt and Chico said on the Devils airways, I don't know if the Devils would be that dumb enough to leave him out there and risk the injury even further. I'm not a doctor, but I think there is a possible avenue that could have been taken, which is they made a temporary fix, but they said as soon as the season ends, you're going to have to get surgery. And I'm sure the Devils were delaying it as much as they could. This is just pure speculation on my end. I can't confirm, I can't deny it. I'm not in the medical field, but we have all that modern medicine. We have all that modern technology. I'm sure there were some alternate ways to make sure that Jack Hughes was able to suit up on the rink and be somewhat safe, but he couldn't play to the best of his abilities. Like I said, take that with a grain of salt. I'm just trying to throw out some suggestions here, because if that was the case, Devils have been inconsistent. Their chances of getting into the playoffs, they had some opportunity to try to gain some traction in the wild card standings, but they were never fully there. And I guess it makes sense to not really shut down Jack Hughes in that sort of circumstance. But like I said, at this point, when you have everything to lose and nothing to gain, you're pretty much put into a corner and you have no choice but to follow orders in this case and just bite the bullet, get Jack Hughes' surgery as early as possible so that way he's ready to go. But take the information how you want to take it. Just to reiterate, injured in November, injured again in January. Both of them were arm injuries, and now he requires shoulder surgery. Take the information how you want to take it, make your own conclusions. But my conclusion is that Jack Hughes was never fully healthy, but I'm sure the doctors and the medical staff, with everything they possibly have nowadays, tried their best to make sure that Jack was healthy and safe on the rink. But ultimately, got to get the surgery at some point. And I'm sure since the Devils saw that they had some chance of maybe gaining some traction and getting a second wildcard spot, especially with the Flyers, Capitals, Red Wings all being somewhat inconsistent, the Devils said, we have a bit of a chance to make the playoffs here, but you obviously need Jack Hughes in this case. But that's just speculation on my end. Now, we're going to talk about Jack Hughes' potential and development momentarily. But before we continue, let me tell you guys about the Sleeper app. Regardless of where the Devils are at in the current standings, I want to remind you that you can win big by playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper, the official daily fantasy app of Locked On NHL Network. Sleeper is our number one choice for daily fantasy sports, especially daily fantasy hockey, because with Sleeper, you can win 100 times in cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. You don't just have to participate in fantasy hockey. You can also participate in fantasy football, basketball, baseball, college football, all on the Sleeper app. To win 100 times bet on Sleeper, you need to correctly predict the outcome of 8 player stats. You heard me, Devils fans. You can win 100 times your money playing daily fantasy hockey with Sleeper. So start paying attention and nail your picks so you can start winning big. Use the promo code LOCKEDONNHL and you'll get a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability. Okay, let's talk about the future for Jack Hughes. I put this out on social media a couple days ago. Let's look at the recent scoring production the last few seasons for Jack Hughes. 2021-2022, 56 points in 49 games played. Last season, 99 points in 78 games played. He broke Patrick Eliash's record for most points in a single season. And this year, like I said in the first segment, 74 points in 62 games played. The biggest what if so far is what could his numbers and potential look like if fully healthy? And I think that's the main talking point that I have for Jack Hughes at this point in his career, because I still believe he can take over this league and become an MVP caliber player. But the problem is like if he's always injured and he's projected to miss a few games every year, that's seriously going to hinder his development, because he should be in the discussion for the Hart Trophy, quite honestly. And that was a serious discussion within the first couple months of the season prior to his injury against the St. Louis Blues. You don't believe me? Well, during the month of October, he had 18 points, which led the NHL. He had 13 assists, which led the NHL. He had 3 power play goals, tied for second in the NHL. He had 7 power play assists, tied for first in the NHL. In 8 games played, nonetheless, and he was the NHL's first star of the month in October with that stat line. If he kept up that same production and did not get hurt the very next month, Jack Hughes should be a top 5 MVP discussion. And I hope that's not a hot take. I think if he kept up that same pace, that would be a legitimate discussion. And unfortunately, it's the same thing that we saw a couple seasons ago, which Jack Hughes had a phenomenal point productive year. But once again, injuries have just derailed him. He's still young in his career. But the thing for Jack Hughes is that he has got to stay healthy. And I think one of the big things that can really help Jack Hughes is that he has to work on his skating just a little bit more. Like I said, I'm not trying to be controversial here, but there have been a couple times in which it seems like Jack Hughes blows a tire, he loses an edge, he slips on an invisible banana peel. In fact, that's a meme itself. Jack needs to not be like Bambi out there at times, because otherwise you risk the chance of getting yourself hurt. And case in point, against the Blackhawks, I think Jack is bound for greatness. And I think a lot of people in the NHL community can agree with me, including the great one, Wayne Gretzky, who has gone on the record and said that Jack Hughes has the best chance of catching 97. 97 being Connor McDavid, that big-headed monster in Edmonton, alongside with Leon Draisaitl, Zach Hyman, all those guys that can put up a lot of points. I think Jack Hughes definitely can reach that threshold, but it's going to take some time. I definitely think he can be in discussion for like Austin Matthews, Nathan McKinnon. Maybe down the line, we'll be talking about Jack Hughes, similar to how we talk about Sidney Crosby or Alexander Ovechkin, two guys who have been in the league forever, but put up a lot of point production throughout the course of the year. And they're one of the best players to ever lace up the skates. Jack Hughes is destined for that, but he's got to stay healthy. And another thing, aside from working on his skating ability, because he can skate fast, but you just got to control it a little bit more so that way you're not slipping and sliding out there. He needs to gain a little bit more muscle. And I know I'm beating a dead horse at this point. I know this has been heavily documented. I know this is heavily discussed. But if this season is any indicator, Jack Hughes just needs to gain a little bit more muscle, because teams are going to be gunning for him now. And we've seen this throughout the course of the year. It's not just Jack Hughes. It's Nico Hischier. It's Jesper Bratt. The Devils are no longer an underdog team. So players are going to be somewhat even more aggressive against them. And remember, one of the big talking points is who's going to step up for the star players, because you don't want Hischier dropping the mitts. You don't want Hughes dropping the mitts. You don't want Bratt dropping the mitts, because they're going to get laid out every single time, more likely than not. That's why you trade for someone like Curtis McDermott. But I'm not saying that Jack Hughes needs to become this big enforcer type guy. That's an impossibility. But I think he just needs to gain a little bit more weight in muscle, so that way he's not really moved off the puck all that often, and it can give him a chance to be a little bit more physical and protect himself to an extent, because we saw him brace himself early on in the year. First game of the season against the Detroit Red Wings. Remember when Mo Seider was coming at him? Jack Hughes basically had to brace himself, and he and Seider got tangled up, and I think that actually resulted in Jack Hughes getting a penalty, if my memory serves me well. But I remember Jack Hughes had to be a little bit careful out there. But that's the situation for Jack Hughes. The season is pretty much over. The injury woes for Devils continue, but hopefully Jack Hughes making a full recovery is a sign of good things to come. And like I said, I can't really pinpoint when the injury actually occurred. It could have been recent. It could have been early on in the season. We don't really know for a fact, but that's just some speculation and food for thought to provide. Let me know what you guys think about Jack Hughes, the injury situation, where you think it occurred, and how the Devils can rebound from it. Curious to hear your guys' thoughts. Leave a comment down below if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening on a podcast streaming service, hit me up on my personal X Page app at TreyMatt4 or the show's X Page app at Locked On Devils. As for this episode, that's all the time I have for you. Continue to stay safe. Have a wonderful day in New Jersey. Go Devils. I'll catch you guys in the next episode. Thanks for listening once again.